speaker today is Matt. He was also a speaker at the first edition of Cluj PM, and he's going to tell us about rage-driven development. It sounds very cool, so I'll just pass it on to you.
Thank you. Well, good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and mongers. Rage-driven development. So, okay, open source. The principle of open source, all right, a bunch of us do end up managing to contribute to work, but a lot of it is around scratching your itch, right? That's what gets you to actually first dip in. But what I want to suggest is, okay, scratching your itch. This is slightly irritating me. Maybe I should fix it. Yeah, that's cool. But what about rage? Rage is a much more powerful motivator than mild irritation. And honestly, all of my best work has come from not just an itch, but why doesn't this exist yet? I can see how to build it. It's obvious how to build it. Why did nobody do that already? I suppose I'll have to. And similarly, why do we have to do this to get the result? Surely there's a better way. Surely there's a simpler way. Surely, So the original instance of this back many moons ago was when dealing with class DBI, one of the very first ORMs for Perl. No joins, no prefetch. 2004, 2005. Somebody mentions Rails had just started turning up on people's radar. They mentioned active record being able to do include, which is prefetch, and basically when I bet class DBI can't do that. And how do you get a Perl programmer to do the impossible? You tell them it's impossible. So I'm kind of like, I'm sure that this must be possible. So Chanson had written this thing called Class DBI Suite that added SQL abstract searching. So 24 hours later, I had working join and prefetch. And it basically worked within the limitations of Class DBI, and that was kind of cool. But still, helping people out on Hash Catalyst, it couldn't do compound foreign keys. You couldn't have a two-column primary key, let alone a foreign key. It was a constant fight with the internals because you couldn't easily change the internals because over the years, people had subclassed it and poked all sorts of ways into the internals of Class DBI. I mean, seriously, that thing didn't just require backwards compatibility, it required bugwards compatibility. So, helping people out drove me nuts. Honestly, as I was in the process of accidentally falling into being involved with Catalyst development, I was still spending more time on Hash Catalyst helping people with Class DBI problems than I was helping them fight Catalyst, which is just ridiculous. And then the breaking point was when I gave a quote to a customer for something. They wanted something that required a moderately complicated query. I gave them my honest best estimate. And they came back to me with, I'm sorry, the feature isn't worth that much money to us. Well, honestly, yeah, that was far too expensive for the business value it was going to provide. But that was the least complicated way I could do it, given Class DBI. So I kind of lost it. So I basically apologized to my customers, said I'd get back to them the following week. Told Mark Keating, please don't let anybody bother me because I ain't going to be paying attention. Took 2 days away of frantic hacking, and the end result of that was the very original release of DBIX class. So yeah, this entire thing, now a 10-year-old project and in massive use, basically exists because I lost my temper. And yeah, there's been a lot of stuff since then, and the vast majority of the code in there is now written by other people, but that's how it started. Another example. Early days of Moose, I was working on a thing called Reaction. Reaction was kind of an attempt to do proper full reactive MVC, use lots of Moose meta reflection, did all sorts of clever stuff. Honestly, it was more complexity than it was worth. I kind of loved that thing, but there was only me and about 4 people who ever figured out how to use it. But one of the things that happened in the process of building it was, because I wanted some extra stuff on top of Moose, I had a use reaction class, which exported strict, warnings, and Moose. Now, if this sounds a little bit confusing, given Moose exports stricts and warnings, this was Moose 0.18. I would be where Moose stole that idea from, because apparently I was the first person to realise you could do that. So, okay, so far so good. Tried something a bit more complicated. So I had an importer that took an argument to, I think, compose a role or something in, I don't remember exactly. But of course that meant you needed to change your underscore before calling Moose import, and it segfaulted. So I asked on hash P5P, by which I say I basically turned up and went, I am out of my depth here, somebody please help me. And eventually discovered that on 584, somebody, I think 585 isn't vulnerable to it. Basically, somebody had tried to fix a memory leak when you changed that underscore and did a goto. They fixed it a little bit too hard, so they ended up freeing something that wasn't a leak, and boom, segfault. So, you know, the question is, so, come on. Having an importer that imports multiple things should be easy, right? So, you know, okay, exporter has export to level, but then everything else needs dealing with a different way. Lots of things have custom exporters, then there's pragma. All right, so you can't go to, so you still need to be able to get the package right somehow. So the traditional solution to that is to do an eval, package whatever, and call the import. Okay, that's great, except pragmas, things like strict and warnings, and there's lots of other stuff now, apply to the scope being compiled. Now you're inside a string eval, that means they apply to the string eval and completely fail to touch anything else. So what you actually have to do is you build a subroutine inside the string eval, return it, and then call it outside, and then that works for both of them. Obviously, this is not the sort of thing you want to be typing very often. So the end result of this particular aggravation was I stuffed it into a module, and that's where import into came from, which is now pretty much the stock way of writing multi-exporters. Also worth looking at preactions import base, which builds on top of it to give you a different syntax. Wraps move stuff, you can do it to have an extended Mojo base exporter, basically whatever. It's one of those sufficiently encapsulated insanity is indistinguishable from technology situations. Okay, another one, callbacks. You know, when you're doing event-driven stuff, okay, I prefer IO async, I get on fine with Mojo IO loop, I can live with Poe if I have to, any event can die in a fire, but what I always want to do is have logic objects that are independent of the event system. So, callbacks and OO, okay, so this starts to get aggravating because you're writing this all over the place, yeah? Now, as soon as you do that in a situation where you're keeping a reference to the thing that holds the callback, congratulations, you just won a free memory leak. So what you actually need to do is that. If you're wondering why I wrapped it in an outside sub, on older Perls there is a bug in the way closures work, where if you close over one thing in a scope, it closes over the entire scope, which means even if you've weakened one copy, you can still manage to link memory. So what you do is you wrap it up in this extra subroutine, weaken in there, then return the subroutine. Okay, great. Again, I do not want to be typing this. So I had to dig around Perl's method dispatch, figured out a way to bend it, and stuffed it in a module. And this gives us curry.pm. So you can do curry : method to get a basic callback, and curry weak does the weaken dance for you. And then I never have to think about that again. You have no idea how many fewer memory leaks I had in my async code after I wrote that thing. Another one. Okay, these are all examples of me losing my temper because I'm good at it, but there is a general theme here, and that's the point. Through one of the serious DBX class contributors, was complaining about having to always, if he wanted to check if he had something you could call a method on, do a bless check first and then do the can, because if you call the can on anything other than an object, you're going to get an exception. Now, okay, theoretically, you can avoid that by using universal can as a function, but that's bad, evil, horrible, introduces bugs, and just please never do that. So I stared at this and went, this is just heinous. I am sick of typing this. What can we do? Well, you can't use the foo : bar trick like in curry or import into, but what Perl will let you do is you can pass it to code ref instead of a method name in a string. So what you do is you make a subroutine called $_can that encapsulates the logic, and then you stuff that in a module, and that's safe-isa, which is also well worth having a look at. I will be entirely honest, part of the reason curry import into and safe-isa are in here is because they're all tiny modules with, if memory serves, no actual dependencies, and they all make writing certain types of Perl significantly less rage-inducing, which is always nice. After all, we have customers to induce rage in the first place, and at least they're paying for it. Cluj.pm. I mentioned I was here the first time around. It was really awesome. It's the only time I have ever given a presentation in the top floor of a bar trying to work out how to juggle a beer, a cigarette, and still advance my slides. This was a challenge I happily accepted, obviously. And I had one talk pre-prepared, which was one about the genesis of Moo. And then one I wrote on the day, basically because I got there, started talking to Amalia, and I think one of the Evozon higher-ups, and they went, oh yeah, we thought, given we're just starting a .pm group, maybe you do some talking about community. I'm like, I don't actually have anything prepared that fits that. On the other hand, I do have 3 years worth of slides on my laptop, and Evozon has a coffee pot. So I basically took three different talks, cut chunks out of them, and then stitched them back together. Well enough that until I admitted it, nobody had either nobody had seen the seams or everybody had been too polite to tell me. This time, on the other hand, you hosted YAPC EU. So most of you have already had a chance to see, either live or on the videos, all of the talks that I actually had pre-prepared that I still wanted to give. So I needed a new talk. And given I'd done Decade of Dubious Decisions, which was mostly around people dragging me into things by going, hey, do this. I thought I'd go from the other end and talk about things where I dragged myself into things, mostly for reasons of rage. So yeah, I wrote it today. It is not put together from previous talks. I considered cannibalizing slides from previous talks, but decided I didn't want to do it twice. But of course, however, should work out fine. Anyway, I did promise you that I would be talking about deployment stuff as well. Funnily enough, I can do that without leaving the theme. Because frankly, deployment and toolchain is probably my favorite source of rage in the world. Freenode hash Perl. I've been a regular and an op on there for, I don't even remember how long now. One of the things we commonly used to get was people turning up going, and we go, use this module. They go, I can't use this module. Do you have a shell? Then you can use the module. No, I've not got root. I can't. You don't need root. What you do need to do, however, is set up your Perlite 5lib in your bash RC, and then configure cpan.pm to pass the right arguments to make file.pl and build.pl. and make sure you don't have anything else in your cpan config that screws that up. And it turns out you can do that in about 20 minutes. The thing is, even when I was doing it myself for my own installs, I only got it right the first time, about a third of the time. So trying to talk a newbie who doesn't actually know what I'm explaining through it is just, oh. This is not an experience I want anybody to have to repeat ever. So I got somewhat annoyed. Started reading through the source code to make Maker a module build, and eventually worked out that if you got rid of everything else from the cpan config, if you set Perl 5lib and path to find things afterwards, Perl mmopt to configure makefile.pl, and module build RC and generated an appropriate RC file, everything would just work. The only annoying part of that was that you had to generate the module build RC, so if you moved it around, you couldn't do that. So a bit later, I went and taunted the module build team with the fact that they were supposed to be the replacement for MakeMaker, and yet MakeMaker was actually more configurable than them. And they were kind enough to respond to this by fixing it, so it then became just Perl mbopt, and you didn't need the file on disk. And basically, that would be where local lib came from, which I'm guessing most of you have ended up using at least once. So yeah, the current use cpan saga on freenode-perl, great motivator, believe me. So people go, I'm not installing modules just for one script. I'm like, no. But it would be quicker to write the script that way. But then I'd have to install the modules on all the machines it runs on. Yes, and I've just told you how to do that. It's one no, all right, fine, hang on. Okay, so I could inflict par on them? No. I'd rather not use modules than try and get par to work. It was written by Audrey Tang. She is smarter than I am. I don't know how to drive that thing. So I went, hang on. If they're only pure Perl, I don't need any of that clever. All I have to do is bolt the dependencies onto the front of the script and hook at inc so it knows how to load it from the bolted on section. And the end result of that was that fat packer. So, okay, so far so good. We're now getting closer to people not being able to refuse to use cpan. And as a minor point, I wanted nice OO and still to be able to fatpack scripts. And that would basically be the point of rage that caused Moo to originally exist. The fact it's turned out to be useful for all sorts of other things was a complete accident. I was just pissed off. Anyway, so the next objection is, I'm not fatpacking a single-use script. I'm like, well, okay. I can see your point of setting up the fatpack is a bit of a pain if you're only planning to run it once. So back to, I don't have a good enough argument, but I don't want to teach you to write by hand something that's 2 lines if you use cpan. How do we fix this? What if you have SSH access, I could transfer those dependencies on demand. So, some amount of crazy later, you can. And that's object remote. If you ever have a point where you need to run a small piece of code on a bunch of machines and you don't want to install everything onto the master machine, an object remote will SSH in, launch a copy of Perl, send itself over the wire so it understands how to fetch further stuff, and then run your code. And it reads the dependencies from your local disk. Customers of Shadowcat have used that quite substantially for agentless introspection, automation, deployment, all sorts of crazy things. Very good fun. Meanwhile, I need to take a brief moment and talk about Miyagawa. Now, Miyagawa is lovely. Miyagawa is so lovely that I'm not entirely sure he does rage. That or this, either he doesn't do rage at all ever, or it's the white English guy can't read Japanese people at all problem. Either way, I'm not sure I've ever seen him beyond slightly peeved. But still, he gave us cpan minus because he was sick of all of the other things about cpan.pm configuration. Amusingly, that actually uses local lib and is shipped fat-packed. So, you know, even if you never directly use fat-packer yourself, if you're using cpan minus, you're kind of accidentally using it anyway. And it took a lot of the rage out of installs. And then he was kind enough to give us Carton, which gives us non-rage reproducible installs. Makes so many things so much easier. Then you had Darkpan. And we're back to, oh, for crying out loud, what are you doing, world? Because, I mean, okay, there's a bunch of existing solutions. Mini CPAN, Pinto, Orpan 2. But basically, all of those create a full, albeit partial, local CPAN mirror on disk. Which, if you're just trying to snap a couple of disks together, like, I don't know, you have in-house : A that depends on in-house : B, and you want to test them both together. It's a bit of a pain in the neck. There is a thing called MyPerl, which I also wrote a few years back, that will make that a bit easier because you can just put the lib directories into a config file. Still not ideal though. And so I'm kind of like, why do I have to give up several gigabytes of disk space just to get one Darkpan distribution into this thing? And so I went, hang on, what if you did something that acted as a mirror when you asked it for a Darkpan disk, but when you asked it for a normal CPAN disk, just effectively acted as an HTTP proxy and talked to upstream? And with a little assistance from Modulicious, I wrote AppOpan, which is basically designed to be pin CPAN distributions, custom CPAN distributions, send everything else through to CPAN, and then you can just point cpan minus or Carton at that, and it all basically just works. Part of this was, I had a customer who had, I think they had one in-house distribution that depended on another 8 in-house distributions, and I was in the situation of, I want to throw all of this into a local lib. I am not doing it with a janky shell script. So I jammed all of it into an OPAN and didn't install from there. And shockingly enough, that actually works fine and simplifies life quite significantly. Okay, great. So far, so fantastic. So the combination of these four, I would say at the moment, is your best bet for sane and non-aggravating deployment of complicated stuff. However, there is still one thing that drives me up the wall. The classic example of it is, has anybody met Moose Outdated? Yeah. So, if you upgrade, basically, if you upgrade Moose, sometimes you need to upgrade a bunch of your Moose X stuff. It happens with a lot of things. Moose is just the one that happened to go to the effort to make it easy to find the problem. Now, you can put conflict entries in there, but because all current CPAN installers do basically one dependency at a time, they don't notice that they've already gone past something that needs to change. Think about if you install a Moose X module and then later upgrade Moose, nothing can tell that the Moose X module needs upgrading. Conflicts in general just aren't something that our current tools solve. So I am working on that. I do not entirely have an answer yet. The trick is to have a full stack dependency solver, so something that takes your CPAN file and maps out all of the dependencies that you're going to need up front. So it knows it's got a complete set that work together and can then go and install those into a local lib. And that way you can handle conflicts, because when you snap in the newer version of Moose, it knows it needs to go back and retry the Moose X, and so on and so forth for other conflicts. I I almost had it working at YAPC NA last year. It was terrible. I decided to run one last test to try and make for a cool final slide. And I managed to send it O of 2 to the power n, which even when you've got like 50 distributions, is just broken. I basically gave my talk about the process of trying to write this thing rather than having a release. Swore quite a lot and went back to the drawing board. The basic answer is it needs smarter backtracking. Your problem is if A requires B, and then A requires C, and A requires D, and A requires E, if B asks for X, and then like way down when you get to like K, that requires X and you have a different version, it basically has to go through every single possibility that it could have picked until it gets back to the X one. Because it's prolog style, and the standard prolog approach is brute force. Now, standard prologs deal with this by being written in lovingly hand-optimized C code, which is fine in theory, but then doesn't allow me to make it possible to do things like writing plugins in Perl. And if I said to you, this would solve all of your dependency problems, all you have to do is write 2,000 lines of C code, I really don't think anybody would be particularly interested. So instead, what I'm working on is a more intelligent algorithm that only retries the relevant decisions. So when it sees that like C through G didn't make any difference, it will retry the last version for K and then pop straight back up to the wrong decision earlier and find it and fix it. At which point you get back to O of n squared-ish, and the O of n squared-ish version was taking maybe 30, 40 seconds on Acme Mum Yours, which has about 800 dependencies. That's relatively acceptable. So yeah, I've been slowly rewriting it since. I was kind of hoping that by now I might be able to go, and here it is. But of course that never happens. But the Rage will provide. Maybe by London Perl Workshop. If not, look out for it at one of the YAPCs next year. But the point of all of this is, I wish this existed. It's not bad motivation. This is obviously possible. Why the flying fornication doesn't it exist already is excellent motivation. So when you run into a situation like that, rather than going, okay, this is bad, I need to calm down, take the rage and channel it, because CPAN will be a better place for it. The rage can provide. Happy CPANning, everybody, and thank you.